Welcome back everyone to another Kaiserreich Ramble video. Since the last one was actually very successful, I'm gonna do one for the other big part that I'm looking forward to in the new update. There's a few nice things, but the one that I'm really most looking forward to after the Italy rework is the Indochina stuff, or in general just the German East Asia rework. Now, the German East Asia is a new state that's coming. You can see right here is essentially Germany's eastern colonies just put together under one administration of sorts. And you can see it stretches all the way from Papua New Guinea and Rabaul and Caroline Islands, all of that. Guam is American, but the other Marianas up here are all German. Yeah, essentially all the German islands in the Pacific that in real life had been taken away from Germany by Japan and the Americans. In this timeline, of course, they're still German. Then Germany has seized control of some other colonies of other countries, such as over here, Guangzhou 1, a French possession, is now German. Hainan Island used to be Chinese, now it's German. French Indochina is German. Singapore and Malaya, of course, and northern Borneo and Brunei. So this is all German East Asia, which is, it has been described as a navy with a state. That is because if you look at over here in the top right, you can see that it is led by Helmut von Mücke, who was the admiral that commanded the SMS Emden, famous raiding cruiser that had a very particular journey in the east. I believe it was from the Qingdao squadron in real life. Anyway, what ends up happening is that... Do you even control Qingdao? Or is that just German Empire? I do not know. Anyway, so their whole shtick is that they are essentially a detachment of the Kaiserliche Marine in the Far East. So what they actually are is that after, of course, World War I ends, you have that... the British and French empires collapse, and that takes their colonial empires down with them. So Germany kind of, quote-unquote, steps in as protector of the East, if you may, and absorbs these colonies into Germany, or into the German colonial empire. But considering that these colonies already had a fairly unstable political structure, what the Germans have to do is that instead of just removing it outright and replacing it with German administration, they keep these colonies with their administrations intact and their political systems intact. They just give them an overarching authority to operate under. That is to say, German East Asia. That was actually established by von Tirpitz, I believe, in the lore. Take a look at the Chancellor Tirpitz. So later Tirpitz, the commander of the German Navy during World War I, becomes Chancellor, and it eventually is formalized in Deutsch Ostasien, which is essentially just a colonial conglomerate of French Indochina, British Malaya, Singapore, and a lot of German colonies. So it's kind of like, at this point, the leaders of this country essentially are the ones that have to kind of unite together this disparate kind of empire that has interests that are both local, native kind of interests. Of course, local native leaders did play a big part in colonialism. They also control, of course, the local colonial administrations of various different countries, German, French, and British, and probably there might be some Dutch in there. No, there's no Dutch. Okay, good. And of course, there's the fact that they're supposed to be a colony of Germany, so they have to think about the interests of the mother country as well, the Metropole. So this is the tree, and it's actually very expensive, as you can see. It's mostly focused around Navy stuff. There's a tiny army stuff, army tree, if you may, that is not that bad because it's kind of focused around what kind of army you're going to have. Essentially, you have either the choice of going with a German force or use the locals. That is because if we look at the national spirits up there in the top right, you can see that one of them is the colonial government, so they don't get called into wars. Another one is a Navy advisor kind of thing, because since they're like a Navy, essentially for them naval research, naval doctrine research is easier. And then you have that little icon with the, I don't know how to call it, like a plant on top of it. That's actually minus like 70% recruitable population, something like that, because of course you're like a colonial master, so you're not going to really have access to all of the manpower of all these regions, partially due to, well, outright racism on your part, partially due to the fact that people don't want to work with the colonial occupiers. Now, if you go with the German force, that gets worse. You actually have the modifiers written down over here. You have minus 80% recruitable population, plus 10% to all combat stats. If you go down the line, then you get different elite units. You can see there the military police and the Prussian guards, and you also get some land doctrine bonuses. So that's what you do. Essentially, you try to make your force more efficient, more quality. Then if you want to have more manpower, you're going to have to, say, use the locals. That takes some integration, of course, so it decreases the efficiency of your army. You start off with actually minus 50% recruitable population, so a 20% increase from the standard. And then you lose, at first, 15% to your combat stats, but then you regain 10% more from that breach the language barrier focus over there that you can see right now, like this one. And then you have formal rights for service and native garrisons, which just spawn units. So away with you, you're not useful anymore. Then you, the main part is the Navy stuff. There's a part to the right, but, oh god, what the fuck? Anyway, there's a part to the right, but I don't know, I don't remember what it is. And yeah, the Navy stuff is the most important. You're going to be essentially like Germany's enforcer in the East. And it's kind of nice because you're not supposed to start off with like your own industrial capacity or anything like that. So what you have to actually do is that you request aid from Germany, you expand your own dockyards in Singapore, just like the British did in the 1930s. And then you choose, of course, whether or not you're going to have a naval aviation and convert a carrier. I like how there's carrier conversion. It's kind of implied that if I've seen a stream that showcased the preview for East Asia, you have 5 battleships to start off with. So this carrier conversion focus kind of implies that you're going to get the ability to convert some of those to carriers. You also start off with 2 carriers, so you're in a very, very strong spot when it comes to you know, planes, ships, all those things. Anyway, you also have a tiny air tree that is, of course, linked. And yeah, at some point you're going to have actually the way open to actually build your own ships. I'm not sure what this SMS Nakar is supposed to be from the Fleeting Being. Might be a super heavy battleship or something. And you also have, of course, some like defensive land stuff, but nothing really too particularly strange over there. Now, what is interesting is that once you're starting off, essentially Indochina's, not Indochina's, the German East Asia's position officially is that it's kind of an anti-Japanese bulwark in the east for Germany, of course, because Japan is starting to intrude upon the eastern possessions of the colonial powers, and Germany does not want any of it. So German East Asia is essentially supposed to be just like the British Singapore colony and the China station of the British Royal Navy, a bulwark against Japan. However, there's also internal problems. There's a lot of internal problems in Indochina. That is partially because in the 1920s, essentially all the colonial soldiers that had been shipped to France during the Weltkrieg are coming back into Indochina, and of course, a lot of them have been trained by the French, essentially, to fight against the colonial occupation and for syndicalism. A little bit like how after World War I, the Hungarian prisoners in what became Soviet Russia and the Soviet Union eventually were sent back to Hungary, and a lot of them were actually had kind of switched sides, the Bolsheviks, and then from there came the Hungarian Revolution in 1919 and the Hungarian Soviet Republic. However, here it's kind of more interesting because what German East Asia can do, as you can see, is restore Emperor Bao Dai, which is kind of like what the Japanese and the French did in our timeline, to kind of give a puppet to Vietnam and try to quell Vietnamese nationalism that way. So you can see that what you can do is that once the Indochina War breaks out, because yes, Indochina will break out, as you can see, relatively early on, because there's just too much unrest going on. Indochina will break out, and there's a few unique decisions that German East Asia can take to suppress the uprising. As you can see, there's like an insurgency strength meter. I'm not sure what that is supposed to represent, but there's like their own unique mechanic that they've built with the decision system, which is actually really, really cool. I mean, it's not gonna be anything too particularly surprising, but I like that they did it. So you can see you can shell Saigon, suppress Viet Cong and Tonkin, and reinforce the police. So you can do that. And probably there's a few more decisions that are gonna happen based on what the Indochinese rebels do, which we're gonna take a look at soon. Anyway, this is what Indochina starts off with, essentially. The main uprising is in the south. There's also uprisings in the north from what I've seen, but the main one is in the south. And you are essentially, again, French supported and trying to rise up against German colonial rule. Now, if this Bao Dai solution is accepted by the Germans, what happens is that Vietnam becomes independent, and there's supposed to be a focus treaty, which is this one. So you get this Vietnam focus tree. Now, they have actually stated, I believe, that it's not, okay, so, the counter-revolutionary Vietnamese state under Emperor Bao Dai. So this is the focus tree. Sadly, the focus tree and the events for Vietnam are not finished now and will not be included in the 0.6 release. However, they will be added, I believe, in the next patch. So this is kind of just a sneak peek. It's what will be after 0.6, but not in 0.6. Anyway, what's really cool about this focus tree is that there's a few nice things. Like, you have three options. You can either have a constitutional monarchy, and that will eventually lead down to something called Embrace Indochina over here. I wonder what this could be. Are you gonna turn into Indochina and have cores on Laos and Cambodia and not just be Vietnam? Who knows? Moral monarchy. What's kind of interesting is that there's this quadrilingual education, which is, I believe, supposed to be Vietnamese, Chinese, French, and German. French and German because, of course, French colonial administration and German colonial administration. With Vietnamese and Chinese, it's like China, just like with Japan and Korea, Vietnam was very, very much part of the Chinese cultural sphere. So you can see down here, there's also this modern Mandarin focus. So that's why I think that the fourth language would be the Chinese, because for a long, long time, actually, the administration of the Vietnamese states were essentially using Chinese, a little bit like how, I guess you could say well-educated Koreans would speak Chinese to each other. It was just kind of like that kind of thing. A little bit like how the church used Latin in the medieval world. And so that was kind of like... the thing that Mandarins would do, literally, Mandarins are just like bureaucrats. So, yeah, it's kind of nice that you do that. Then you have your other options. Of course, Authoritarian Rule, there's two options, actually. I believe it's Bao Dai is just the head of state as a whole. However, you can either just give more power to Bao Dai or to Vietnam's Miracle Man, who is actually Ngo Dinh Diem. I've mispronounced him, but there will be a picture because I will actually edit this video a little bit. Yeah, believe it or not, you've been seeing this already. He's actually like the prime minister of in real life Vietnam from like 1954 or something to 1964. He was essentially an American puppet. Eventually, though, the Americans turned on him because he was just terrible in some ways. But yeah, that's not a story that we need to tell right now, but there is some of it. There's some leaking. There's this nepotism. Essentially, this guy really liked giving like his family things and all that. You can see it's also linked to this Virgin Mary Goes North. That is because he was a Catholic, I believe. There can be a referendum for the Republic, so of course just taking away Bao Dai's, I guess you could say, puppet status, just even just a formal puppet status, just taking it away. And yeah, personalist revolution, that just being like the cult of personality of the leader. And it's also kind of nice because you have part of the focus tree that's dedicated on how you're going to fight the Vietnamese syndicalist uprisings, because that's kind of your job, technically. So there's also like the strategic Hamlet thing that the state of Vietnam, or I guess it was the Republic at that point, the Republic of Vietnam had done in real life, essentially like fortified villages. Then there's two extra things that, of course, the restorationists can do, that being the land to the tillers and the village autonomy. So that's actually what you do. Anyway, then you actually have another path, which is the, I believe this was going to be the national populist path. So religious fervor. So one of them is like you're going to be turning into Catholicism, and from there you can get essentially go Dien Diem's path and the Republic, or you can have Cao Daiism. Probably mispronounced that as well. I'm just going to pronounce it Cao Dai because I don't know. I just know it like that. I don't know it. That's just how I think it's pronounced. Anyway, it's actually like a Vietnamese syncretic religion. It's a little bit like the Yiguan Dao in China. If you know the Shanqing Tianguo in Kaiserreich, they're based on the Yiguan Dao religion, which is kind of like a syncretic kind of religious doctrine. Cao Daism is a little bit like that. It's kind of like a mixture of a lot of ancient Eastern philosophies, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and essentially Catholicism. So you can see like this, there's like this convergence of 5 religions. I'm not sure which one is the 5th one. Maybe Hinduism? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know that much about this, but it's kind of interesting. You can proclaim the Cao Dai Republic and become essentially a crazy religious fundamentalist, even though you're a religious fundamentalist of accepting every religion and elevating women because, hey, they're nice. I like that. And you're going to essentially become a church state. So that's very, very interesting, actually. I can't wait to see how that is. Or you can invite Prince Xuong De. Again, probably horribly mispronounced it. But he's essentially like a crazy national... Well, not really that crazy. He's just a little bit more nationalist than Bao Dai. And yeah, a little less ready to bow to foreign pressure or whatever. So then you get to the rest of the Indochina stuff, which is to say, of course, the Indochinese Union. Now, the Indochinese Union is going to spawn, of course, over here. And they're not led by Ho Chi Minh in this update, because Ho Chi Minh has been removed. He has been murdered in this timeline in 1924, I believe, or something. But he had sort of kick-started the Indochinese revolutionary and nationalist movement. And eventually with his death, though, it kind of splinters into these 4 groups that you see over here in the political focus tree. That is to say, if you're going to be managing to win the revolution as Indochina, and to do that, you do have this nice thing. So when you're doing the revolution and you're having to fight against the combined might of the German Empire and the German colonial forces, you're going to have ways to... do that with this resistance decision mechanic, and some of these cost war support. Then you get guerrilla strength from that. You can spend your guerrilla strength and just do a whole bunch of things. It's really, really nice. I wonder what these bonuses and changes will be, but I really like that system, and I do hope that that is going to be good and fun to play with. Anyway, if you do manage to win with those new mechanics, you're going to have a choice between 4 different types of your revolution. You either have the anarchists, which is what you start off with, the Aspiration Society, a little bit like the Korean anarchists. If you remember my video on the Korean anarchists, go ahead and take a look at that. It was actually about real life, but yeah. So Eastern anarchists, of course, very, very rural, but and a revolutionary spontaneity. But you do have a cool thing. You can get modernist culture and breaking the patriarchy and all that, or you can be truly ruralist and make the revolution of the 1,000 communes in the countryside, and that becomes a personality revolution. The two main, I guess, classical things you're going to be doing is, of course, syndicalist and totalist. Totalist is going to be vanguardist. Now, does it explain this further over here? I mean, of course, vanguardist is no, it doesn't really explain that. Anyway, vanguardist is, of course, a vanguard party. Now, what that means is that these people don't believe that they need to have a mass organization. They need only a sort of organized minority that is a vanguard for everyone else. Essentially, they are the most advanced, the most politically conscious element, and then they can lead everyone else once they're essentially pissed enough to rebel. That is the basics of that kind of thought. And it's, to be honest, it's totalist represented. Once again, it's one of those things where like totalism is like sometimes just batshit insane Nazballs, and sometimes it's just, hey, people who are slightly more secretive, you know? So you can either have just regular socialism, you know, have worker councils, also known as Soviets, proletarian culture, urbanization, regular socialist, or police state. That's kind of one of those things about totalism and Kaiserreich. It's kind of like, yeah, whatever. And the syndicalists are just like that. Like, you know, let's try to build an industry. Let's try to have cooperatives, usual stuff. Probably more support from France. And then once you've finished that, you can either say empower the Congress of Trade Unions, essentially say La Lutte. I have no idea what that is going to be. Or democratic centralism, which is an in real life sort of political doctrine, whereupon it's supposed to be how a communist party is supposed to operate. Essentially, you have that the central decisions are supposed to be sort of well, this like the central decisions of like the Politburo or whatever you want to call it are respected by every member, and there's a kind of discipline that governs the party as a whole. But then, of course, every one of these decisions is debated at the local level, and essentially every local level has kind of its own autonomy. So that's why it's democratic, because everyone has a say, and that's why it's centralist, because it's not decentralized, and if a final decision is made on an issue, the whole party is supposed to be standing in unity and upholding that decision, even if they're against it. That's kind of the gist of it. Anyway, then you also have another path, which is the Nationalist Revolution. That is to say the Vietnamese, I believe, Nationalist Party, this VNQDD. I'm not sure if it's exactly the Vietnamese. Yeah, it's the Nationalist Party. They are the Social Democrats, of course, because they are modeled on the Chinese Kuomintang, the Chinese Nationalist Party. So they're supposed to be independent from French influence, although I don't buy that, because like 20 paragraphs earlier it said that, wait, no, actually no, not even that much, just over here, Ho Chi Minh was sent over, and he had made his base. This is, by the way, right after the revolution in France, and he had his base in Guangzhou, in Canton, where the essentially Kuomintang was conducting its nationalist revolution with the help of France. So a little bit like in real life, where the Soviets helped the Chinese Nationalist Party, now the French are helping the Chinese Nationalist Party. So to be honest, I would probably think that the French would help the Vietnamese Nationalist Party as well, as much as they may probably prefer these people, but okay, they can do this as well. Now, you can either say political tutelage or a manifesto. Now, the political tutelage is a, in real life, kind of, I guess you could say, roadmap probably that's the best way to call it, or plan, that was actually made by the Chinese Nationalist Party, by the main founder of it, Sun Zhongshan, or Sun Yat-sen, as he is known, which essentially envisioned that while the Chinese people, of course, were very, very much striving for democracy, they were, of course, partially due to social and economic, their social and economic development level, they could not really just keep a normal democracy functioning, because the society had not developed to the same stage as the West had. So, of course, having the same system made no sense. So the Chinese Nationalist Party would have to have a quote-unquote political tutelage, essentially a kind of dictatorship over China, while essentially the country's social and economic conditions developed until you could have democracy. Or looks like here you can just have like, yay, we're liberal and all of that, we're gonna have democracy anyway. So you can either be like, yes, the Chinese Nationalist Party is cool and I want to do it like they did, or you can say, nah, let's have democracy. And of course, you can go down and just have your own stuff. And you can either embrace Indochina or say Vietnamization. Again, I wonder if this is gonna, like Vietnamization is gonna turn you into Vietnam or something like that. Of course, this Vien QDD is supposed to be the Vietnamese Nationalist Party. So, whereas some of these other ones are like, for example, Indochinese revolutionaries. And of course, the totalists are just weird, but yeah. Then you also have, of course, an Army and Navy tree and Air Force tree. Air Force, I kind of like how they have guerrilla in the air, and the Navy is the pirate doctrine. So always very, very much on that asymmetrical warfare kind of line. And it's, of course, all about either asymmetrical warfare or slightly less asymmetrical warfare in the Army as well. So what's kind of nice is that the center is, of course, the shared path is just what you're going to be normally doing, and I love it. There's the tunnel network that the Viet Cong used in real life, and there's also the Ho Chi Minh Trail that the Viet Cong used in real life. I wonder if that is going to cause problems with Siam, because as you can see, Siam over here controls Cambodia, and they control also parts of Laos. That's because in essentially the follow-up to the World War I, they had taken it from France. So historically, the Ho Chi Minh Trail came down through Laos and through Cambodia into southern Vietnam from the north. So I wonder exactly what this Ho Chi Minh Trail is going to be all about. Most likely, it's going to have something to do with Siam. So it might actually spark some kind of tensions with Siam. I wonder if that's going to be handled in any way. I wonder if Siam's going to be able to help the Indo-Chinese revolutionaries, even though they're filthy, filthy commies. You know, the Siamese might just not like the Germans enough, you know? And yeah, of course, I like also that there is pedal power, essentially because in real life as well, like a lot of the Indo-Chinese revolutionaries had to carry their own supplies of like bicycles and on foot, with some very, very impressive feats of just bravery and heroism. Anyway, there's also the Youth Shock Brigade and extensive female service, probably some special army stuff that you can get. And then you have your two main army plans, which is going to be the general staff and the political officer. The political officer line is going to be more focused on guerrilla tactics, which actually kind of incorporates the phases, the traditional phases of guerrilla, which is to say, first is just the true guerrilla, where you're just hiding and try to ambush enemies when they're weak, harass them when they're strong, and retreat when they chase you. Then you build up your main force. You essentially conduct a both political and military campaign to start to consolidate a force and control territory. And then once you have essentially weakened the enemy enough, you transition into mobile warfare. So this is kind of like the traditional guerrilla plan. Or you can have the General Staff's Reform Plan, which is a little bit more focused on offensive moves from what it seems like. You can either have motorized or commando assaults, and then you have infiltration tactics, concentrated offensive, and go-goose strategy. I have no idea what a go-goose strategy is. Can't wait to see what that is. And you're also probably going to have some night combat bonuses, which is awesome. Of course, Charlie is the Kong, although, to be honest, in this timeline, you would probably not call them Charlies, you know, it's the Germans that are fighting them. So how about the night belongs to Carl? That's probably how they would call them. Anyway, they're still called the Viet Cong, yes, but they're called the Viet Cong because apparently they're supposed to be the Vietnamese syndicalists, the Vietnam Cong Duan. I don't know. I don't know Vietnamese, so I don't know if you can say both Vietnamese communists and Vietnamese syndicalists as Viet Cong, whatever. So this is about it for the Indochina rework. Do tell me if you have any, suggestions or if I've missed something. And wait, there's a new page in the Kaiserreich wiki. Huh. Well, there's also the Kaiserreich wiki that explains things about this. It's actually pretty extensive in the lore. Damn. It's all about that. Yeah, essentially, it's got its own explanation of the Indochinese, sorry, not the Indochinese, the German East Asia government. And, yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Anyway, so, I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this little ramble. And I will see you soon.